Good morning. I wanted to focus on the test. The test will be given in 1 week, November 4th, from 9 a.m. through Sunday, 11:59, a minute before midnight. The test will be available. You can take the test in 90 minutes. You should finish far before that. If you have questions, please ask, okay? There will be 33 questions. The first 5 questions are from the first test. I'm literally from the first test. I'm covering the most, I guess, direct information. Not looking for the most obscure question. I have one question on graphic design, one question on sculptural processes. The one on graphic design is on Johann Gutenberg. I'm asking for the date. That information is available to you in the content browser and also on my, I guess, lecture, last week's lecture. About half of the remaining questions will be multiple choice, sort of as you expect. I'll be covering from Paleolithic through the Renaissance, which is a ridiculous length of time. Each of these topics really deserve a full class. And I just find trying to, whoosh through history like this, it's really a disservice. But this is an introductory course. I'm at least trying to introduce some of these names, some of these ideas, some of the, sort of a chain of ideas that in many ways define the human experience. Trying to think what else. And then the last half of the test, in effect, questions 19 through 31, I'll be showing a slide or of an image. You can tell I'm old, I call them slides. And then ask you to identify the style, identify the artist. There'll be a couple that you have not seen. Again, I'm trying to be very straightforward. In many ways, I've made the test, at least in my perspective, very easy. But if this information is all new to you, I hope it's not baffling. My thought is for you to succeed and gain an enthusiasm for the subject. In fact, my biggest disappointment in not teaching this class directly to you is we're just looking at it without, I guess, sort of the enthusiasm and I can meet with you sort of face to face and talk about some experiences and things like that. I have a genuine care for what I'm talking about. And I only wish I could more directly communicate it. With that, I'm going to look at, we'll start, I'm going to share the screen. And we'll walk through questions and images. And like last time, I'm going to keep this relatively short. I'd rather you watch it fully than sort of lose your way halfway through. So if we look at our Western Online page, I'm going to continue to update things. I do have an important link here. If you click on this, that'll allow you to access, and you'll have to upload then the study guide. The study guide is I'll call it a cheat sheet. It's the names, it's the dates, etc. that I'm asking. When I first talked to you past the first test, we talked about Paleolithic, Neolithic, and sort of the early civilizations. We focused on the Egyptians. I don't know if focused is the right word. Spent like a minute with them. When we last got together, we looked at the Greeks and Romans, We looked at really three I guess styles, Greek styles: archaic, classic, and Hellenistic. We're going to focus on the classic. And today we'll speak very briefly about the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Do know the difference between these two. Paleolithic is cave paintings. These are the paintings of animals on the cave walls. They were painted with, we look at the dates, an extraordinarily long time ago. Neolithic art is really when society changed. We now have agriculture. In fact, that's one of the test questions I'm asking. What are the conditions that created the Neolithic period? To be agriculture and domestication of animals. And art changed. And we'll find that's always, as the human condition changes, the expression of these people's lives, that changes as well. The materials change, etc. So we have this more naturalistic artwork. It was, in fact, I'll describe it as a way to gain control over a really hostile world. These are people who lived in small tribes. I'm sure life was much more precarious than it is now. This is the establishment of early cities. And so the great civilizations, like the Egyptians, we have a very stylized art style, very recognized as symbolic. And I'm going to try to make a relationship between the Egyptians and the Middle Ages. Interestingly, both use symbolic art, and both, in many ways, focus on life past physical death. The Greeks, in many ways, learn from the Egyptians. They have life-sized human sculptures in stone. They also have colonnades. And so in many ways, you can almost see the Greeks as a refinement of Egyptian style, at least a change in direction. So the early archaic art, in many ways, mimics the Egyptians. It's very idealized, stylized. And we reach a sort of a balance. The classical age we can think of as a balance between that earlier, more stylized, more idealized art, and the later are following naturalistic or even expressive art. So when we speak of classicism, it's a balance between those two. The Romans learned from the Greeks. I'm going to present them as if the Greeks came first and the Romans followed. They were at the same time. The Romans defeated the Greeks. They conquered them, but had the greatest admiration for their culture. And I listed a few things about their culture in terms of the arts, theater, etc. But this is also in many ways the foundations of mathematics, of philosophy. It was an extraordinary, just fountainhead of ideas that comes from, I'd say, a lengthy time period. But from what we spoke of previously, this is a short time frame. And the Romans were builders. They took those ideas and basically spread them through the known world, where Athens was a single city about 100,000 people. Rome, also a city though, but it created an empire. And especially during what's called the Hellenistic age, that their influence spread through, at least at the time, the known world. It was in Rome, during the time of the Roman Empire, that Christianity sort of came into being. Christianity is one of the major religions today. Its influence is, in fact, it's hard to think of Manny without the Christian ideas. And it began as maybe not surprisingly, as a outlaw religion. During the Roman Empire, they believed in a whole pantheon of deities, and Christianity spoke instead of a single God. And at first they were suppressed, they were treated with cruelty. And then in the 3rd century AD, Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome. And Christianity survives, sort of flourishes after the Roman Empire falls. After the fall of the Roman Empire, it's interesting that the eastern part of it continues for another 1,000 years. That's at the city of Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. And we can think of, in fact, Moscow often regards itself as the third Rome. It sort of, it becomes sort of the center of Eastern Christianity with the fall of, when I say the fall, it was it became an Islamic city. So it's a fall from, I guess, the Western perspective. You could say the rise from a Middle Eastern perspective. Middle Ages, we'll look at a few images, but just a few. Starts off as, I guess, as I've spoken of, with Roman ideals, Roman structures. The first churches are called basilicas, and they evolve into first sort of castle-like structures, and then into these extraordinary Gothic cathedrals. And we'll talk about this in just a moment. Gothic was not the term they used. That term comes during what's called the Renaissance. And it was looked, the Middle Ages were looked down upon as the Renaissance flourished. And Goth was seen as the invaders. The Goths were the invaders of Rome. And so that term was sort of attached to the Middle Ages as a pejorative. The Renaissance sort of follows the same pattern we see with the Greek styles. We have an early archaic style. We have a balance, a classic or a high Renaissance style. And we'll find that the Baroque age, which we'll speak of after the second test, and very briefly, that would be the equivalent of the Hellenistic. In fact, we'll see that same sequence reemerge several times 200 years ago, and then certainly more recently. With the Renaissance, I'm going to ask for a few names. And I'm asking for Giotto, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Jan van Eyck. These names are probably more familiar, Ninja Turtles. These really are extraordinary people. And they lived in a time that the world we would be familiar with was really sort of coming into being. Leonardo was not an educated man. He was an observer of nature. He kept these sketchbooks. Some 7,000 pages still exist of these sketchbooks. He also painted, and the handful of paintings of his that exist, there's just a few. Two of them are so well known. You'd assume he was a full-time painter. He painted the Mona Lisa, and he painted the Last Supper, at least one version of that. If we look at these dates, this is from the same century as Johann Gutenberg. And Gutenberg's revolution is part of the Renaissance. Michelangelo was just gifted. There's no other word for it. He was a great sculptor, painter. In fact, the Sistine ceiling was his second painting. It was an architect, a poet, etc. Jan van Eyck is a northern artist. These artists didn't meet. Jan van Eyck did come down to the Renaissance. He literally walked from Germany and learned, I guess, the new attitudes and skills, and then he brought them back north. And we have the example of Arnold Feeney painting, which is naturalistic, like the Renaissance, but it is has a lot of the symbolism that we're familiar with the Middle Ages, medieval art. Now, I know I've used those terms interchangeably. So on the test, I try to use the word medieval art, but on occasion I also have Middle Ages in preference. So they are one and the same. Let's see. Yeah, we'll walk through these quickly. Christianity, as we spoke of, this is the early form of basilica, the first churches. The Christians first met, by the way, in the catacombs. The catacombs are the graveyards. These are underground, very extensive cemeteries. There are literally millions of people buried outside of Rome in these catacombs. So the Christians, as an outlawed people, had to meet in secret. And some of the first Christian symbols, the cross actually was used less at that time, but a fish, what's called one called the Cairo, etc. We see them rendered for the first time. The Middle Ages is many ways a coming together of cultures. We look at this. This is the Celtic people. The Celtic people are the barbarians. They were outside the gates of Rome. They fought Rome. And by the way, this is a very brutal period. Julius Caesar, who is rightfully considered an extraordinary, and I guess you'd say great person, but he slaughtered a lot of people. He slaughtered, it's estimated, a third of the Gothic people, and enslaved a third. The rest fled, and they fled to the extreme portions of Great Britain. So when we think of the Celtic cultures, the Irish and the Scottish, they actually come from Germany. And it was basically the Romans who pushed them beyond where the Romans conquered. So we have this very sort of abstract, sort of stylized sort of look. And if we look at the early Middle Ages, we see that style is integrated, brought into, sort of combined with the Greek and Roman traditions. This is much more, if we look at this feels much more like the Celtics. But by the way, and I so badly want to speak at this at length that this kills me to talk about this for 5 minutes. I have taught courses just on this subject. I took classes in this in graduate school. I taught graduate art history classes. So to just fly through this is painful. I did see some of these, they're called illuminated manuscripts. Illumination here. These are small illustrated pages in the Bible. And these Bibles before the printing press were hand drawn, hand copied. Very few copies existed. And when, for example, the Viking raiders came into England, people gave their lives for these books. And I remember going to the British Museum and seeing some of literally the most famous illustrating manuscripts. It is for me an extraordinary experience. We have during the Middle Ages called the Romanesque. You can see the word Rome-like style. So we have the Roman arches. We have Oh, I want to elaborate on this. I'm just going to skip ahead to the Gothic. So that we look at the Gothic cathedrals. These are in many ways Roman style sculptures that have pushed to sort of an architectural sort of limit. Just to give you some examples, this is Chartres Cathedral, and I did visit this. When we arrived, I was with my wife, and we first had to wait outside because there was a bomb threat. And so we just stand outside. It was a cold day, and we walked around, looked at the outside of the building for about an hour and a half. I noticed some people were entering the building. We followed and caught a tour of the foundations underneath. And unfortunately, it was in French, and my French is just. So I could see these things, but then we went into the cathedral itself and spent several hours there. So this is just outside Paris, and I'm so glad I spent so much time. Cathedrals like this were built, here we go, some images of it. These were built over an extraordinary time period. This is more than 100 years past from the time this cathedral began to its completion. And actually it's still being, in effect, worked on. The differences between these two spires is that this one came 2 centuries later and has a different, this is that more Gothic style. Outside we can see these, what's called flying buttresses. And the flying buttresses, along with a peaked roof, instead of the rounded Roman roofs, allow for this greater height. To give you a sense of this height, look at the people down here. This is more than 400 feet in height. And when a cathedral like this was built, one generation would begin it, the next would continue, the next would continue, the next would continue working on it. There is no effort in today's society that matches the extraordinary focus and effort put into the building of these great cathedrals. It literally was a privilege to be there. Again, look at this scale. When these towns were built, maybe 2,000 people lived in the city, and it would rise above these buildings, surrounding houses and stuff that would be 1 story in height. So this literally is sort of a Bible in stone. So whether you're a Christian or not, I think that there's something extraordinary in their creation. And again, we're speaking of the sort of Western story. If we look at the Islamic temples, and I'll use the word temple, or the Hindu temples, etc., they are as extraordinary. It's the same amount of care and time went into the building of those. If we look at the diagram, we can see it is in the shape of a cross. We have the center nave. On the outside, we see statuary like this. This is from an earlier time frame. You can see it's about 1.5 centuries past. These are much more stylized, and we'll see as we enter, we go towards the Renaissance, we see that earlier stylized and more naturalistic, style. So we have that same sort of direction. We see a lot of symbolism. I can recognize these people by the symbols that they're associated with. We can see some of the symbols down here, the staff, the book, etc. In fact, we would recognize Jesus, I thought there's a picture here, by the symbols that accompany him, less than his physical appearance. So this is a population that was not educated. They could not read. So they would know these stories by the symbols, associations with the figures. They would know Jesus by his expression. He'd be holding up 2 fingers. He would have the halo, and within the halo would be, the symbols that further identify him, the coloring of his robe, etc. All these symbols are like the Egyptian symbols in the sense that this is not meant to say this is what Jesus looked like, but this is a symbol of him, and then the saints and apostles, etc. So the glory of the Gothic cathedrals are the stained glass windows. This window, for example, is more than 60 feet across. Chartres Cathedral, during the Second World War, when as the Germans came into the town, these windows were disassembled, and it took them 16 years after the war to put them back together. The effort was certainly worth it because these are the original, and these windows are 700, 800, 900 years old. No area of glass is really more than like a foot in any dimension. That was the limitation of creating glass. The Renaissance follows, and if we look at the early Renaissance, I want to speak of Giotto. They have an image of him very briefly. Sorry to be flipping back and forth between these. Giotto created this work in the year 1306. And if we look at it, it seems more medieval. We have halos, we have angels in the sky, we would have symbols associated with these figures, but something extraordinary is happening. These people occupy real space. There's an illusion of depth. There is a conscious effort to get to have the anatomy, correct. And we see that beginnings that's pointing towards the artists such as Leonardo or Michelangelo. This painting is right outside the Sistine ceiling. It's a huge painting. These figures are life-sized. And what's I think is interesting is even though it's in the Vatican, it's in effect the Pope's private chapel. This isn't Jesus and his entourage, but this is the School of Athens. We have Plato, we have Aristotle, we have these philosophers and thinkers. And this simply would not have been in a church during the medieval time period. So as we come into the Renaissance, there was this awakening of science observation, and there was a revival of that, a way of seeing the world. In many ways, it conflicted with Christianity, but it sort of points to the world that we recognize. So the artist, Raphael, paints this, and I think I mentioned this in passing, but the people in effect posed for these figures are, at least several of them are known to us. This would be Leonardo, who actually posed for that. Here we have Michelangelo, and over here is the artist, included himself in the image, Raphael. The early Renaissance, if we go back to Giotto's work, is sort of a hybrid between earlier medieval art and pointing toward the Renaissance. But by the time we come to artists like Botticelli or Leonardo or Michelangelo, we begin to find this refinement of art that I think still astonishes us. Another thing, again, just to look at this, the birth of Venus. Again, this is not from the Bible. This is from ancient, well, this would be Roman, but Roman deities were based on the Greek deities. So this is looking back to antiquity and and trying to, in many ways, equal it and then surpass it. If we look at the sculpture, in many ways, it's a classical Greek sculpture. This was carved by a single person from a single block of stone. In fact, the block of stone had sat for a couple hundred years. No one found a purpose for it. It was very shallow. And it's in fact, the figure's somewhat thinner than it should be because of the stone it was carved from. Michelangelo carved this when he was 25 years old. He had already created his Pietà. And when he was in his 30s, he was asked to do a painting. And this painting was like the size of a football field. It covers 700 square yards. And he painted it with virtually no assistance. The subject of this is the Old Testament. And it tells literally down the center the creation of life. We have in the center, I think, this image that I think we're most familiar with. We have God with Eve sort of under his arm, reaching out and just right before he touches the finger of Adam has sort of come into awakeness. And then as we go through this, we have surrounding. These are the prophets and Sybil means a female prophet of the Old Testament that sort of point the way to Jesus. It's interesting if we look at these figures, and they're so small we can't see them very well, at least from this distance. But each of these figures are holding either a book or a scroll. And this would be as if these prophets have been told of the future. And some are looking at it with fear. Some are scrutinizing it. Personally, I think these are some of the great works of art. These are huge figures, by the way. This is 60 feet in width. This, again, painted by one person using probably the most difficult of the painting mediums. This is a fresco paint. Literally, it'd be plaster, and before the plaster dries, the paint has to be sort of painted on, and then it seeps into the paint, and that's it. So it was painted small section by small section, and we have these figures that are more than 20 feet. These are massive 20, 30-foot figures. Really quite an extraordinary achievement. This is a detailed one. One thing I think is fascinating, if we look at the shape behind God and Eve, this is a profile of the human brain. Actually, we have all the way down through the brain stem. Michelangelo participated in, or at least observed, dissections. Leonardo did also. He actually nearly lost his life when it was discovered that he participated. He was almost executed for it. And these people obviously know anatomy well. And even though Michelangelo was a very religious person, in many ways he's pointing to an art that is focused on the world around us, the physical world, not the a life after death.